Hello and welcome to the return of Casual Friday. Don has decided to come back from holiday. He's probably off on another one within like 2 weeks, if I know him at all. But for now, he's back. Um, we have a monthly close to talk about. We have his month away to talk about, and just markets in general. So thank you to our audience who've stuck around in this kind of pause period. We're back, including the newsletter, all that good stuff. Back to scheduled programming, and of course, this is brought to you by FTX. So check them out via the links in the description, specifically the mobile trading app. But they've got other stuff for you as well, and we've got some content coming around that in the near future. Don, welcome back. How was your month of rehab away from Twitter and trading?
It was lovely. Thanks for asking. It was a lot of driving. It was a road trip to Portugal and back, and yeah, we only drove for 2 weeks, so it's like 6,000 plus kilometers in the car, which was fun but a little bit exhausting. But yeah, I loved it. Loved every second of it.
Look, ultimately, we know what happened is you got liquidated, and so you became a bus driver. And now that you've made some of it back, it's time to leverage it at 20k again. It's nice of the market to at least stay at similar prices to give you another chance to make it all back, right? That's a good
Yeah,
setup.
leverage it up 100x. See if I can make it back.
And you took some of her money as well, presumably, to,
Oh, I mean, of course, of
what's the
course.
point otherwise, right?
Exactly.
That's good to know. We might as well get like a technical overview and a kind of maybe positional update from you, given it's been a while. And you were, your stock was trading high on Twitter when the market was higher, and since then we've sort of retraced a bit of it. And I'm sure people, and I was at least I saw you getting tagged even on pictures of you and your girlfriend and stuff, being like, "Oh, have you sold? What have you done?" etc. And I'm sure that was the stuff you're worried about. Also, just as a quick aside, and I always do this at the start of the show, but I always find it strange when people argue like, "Oh, we didn't care about your personal life and this, that, the other." But if you look at the engagement that it gets on like tweets, videos, etc., it's like incomparably higher than anything else, right? So
Yes.
one of those can't be true unless it's all just like negative engagement, but it's not. So anyway, with that context aside, I've got the BTC monthly chart open. We had a
Hmm.
monthly close like right on top of 20k, so that's kind of retraced a large portion of its rally. And given your cursed 3AC gap meme, it didn't get to filling it.
Yeah.
Instead, as equities rallied, Bitcoin was kind of just stuck, to be honest, and then just got engulfed when equities puked. That's Bitcoin at 20k. ETH is, the relative strength is definitely still there. Not quite as impressive, back to sort of 15, 1600 from its 2k high, but the ETH BTC pair still looks strong. On the altcoin front, we'll discuss Solana. You basically ruined that chart by selling that range high. Um, but NFTs are all over the place depending on where you look. So and then I'm sure we'll talk about the S&P and Nasdaq as well. So let's start from the top. What do you make
Hmm.
of this Bitcoin dollar monthly, weekly, whatever it may be? I know 20k is still the story, but what does it mean that we're like back here?
Yeah. So it's not obviously it's not the best thing in the world. I would have hoped for some more strength, especially given like this monthly just basically engulfed the entirety of last month. Not a good look. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere really. Honestly, I think it's just gonna go sideways for the next few weeks to months. If I'm like interpreting the traditional markets right, because honestly, it's been an S&P market more so than a Bitcoin or like cryptos like focused market. Um, so for me, I think it's gonna go sideways, but obviously not the best look, especially like when you look at the weekly and you see that the best support level that we've had, which is obviously 20k and like 20 to 18k, like that whole area, got tagged. We had a really nice bounce, but then we got 2 weeks that basically just bearishly engulfed the entirety of the bull action.
Mm-hmm.
Not the best look, but it's still support, right? And if you remember back, and I think making this analogy makes a lot of sense. If you remember back in 2018, 6K, how long that took to break and how many people just lost their fucking minds over it. I think if 20K is ever going to break, I think it's going to look similar to 2018, where we keep on bouncing on it and people just like lose their minds trading it, trying to short or anticipate the breakdown, and then it doesn't happen. It bounces again and again and again. So even if it's bearish, I'd be very surprised if we didn't do anything similar. Obviously, it depends a little bit on the traditional world. If everything goes up in flames, crypto will probably go up in flames as well. That's just how it is.
Go down in flames, maybe.
Yep.
With that analogy, though, is it like, structurally the idea is even if, you sell the same support hoping for a different outcome and you get wrecked every time, and by the time it actually breaks, you've kind of lost conviction. When you make this 30K is the new 6K analogy, sorry,
20K,
20K. Yeah, I wish, right? 20K is the new 6K analogy. Do you think, what's your assessment of the likelihood that it resolves in a similar way? Like, we get our volatility fall off at 20K, and then when you get a volatility expansion, it's at 20K, but to the downside, not to the upside. It's like taking the analogy to like its full logical conclusion, where this is like a fake floor, which then breaks and takes us, what, 30, 40% lower, whatever it may be.
I think it's not. I think there's a good chance this holds. Loom made an argument back in 2018, 2019 that the 6K floor only broke because of the miner, like the hash wars and everything. And while I don't necessarily think that's 100%, like you can never know, obviously, right? Because uh, maybe it would have broken anyway. But I think this time around, if nothing drastic happens, you could make the same argument again. Like it's not gonna break unless something drastic happens, basically. Now, like there's always a catalyst for something in crypto. Like you can always like China bans it or whatever. You can always find something. So you got to be on your toes. But I don't think it's like super likely that it breaks. I think there's a good chance that it does. But there's also a good chance that it's just a bottom in general. Like we just go sideways from here and then start trending upwards again. I don't really want to make a call on that though. I like just looking at this chart. It's like it's the second test of the most important support level. Once we test it 3 or 4 times, I'll have a clearer picture, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a good chance that I'll just be like, okay, I'm gonna be out of this market, not position myself like on the third or fourth or fifth test, and then just wait till it resolves either the up or the downside, and then just come back in again. Because if it goes to the downside, there's like the support levels are quite far away,
Yeah.
and if it goes to the upside, you can still kind of, because if this continues for like a month or 2 or 3, there's going to be some structure to work with, right? Because right now we have a little bit, much better than we've had like a couple of weeks ago, where it's just basically just, okay, there's a support that we've never tested before. You don't really know if it's going to hold or not. Now we have like a little bit of structure. And if we have the rest of the year basically sideways, you're going to have a lot of structure to work with, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm more willing to make like a case for, okay, this is just going to break down or break up. For me right now, it's at support, so it makes sense to be bullish until that support basically fails. Uh, or until that support gets tested a couple of times. So, like, let's say this weekly closes at support, doesn't move, and next week doesn't move either, and then the week after doesn't move either. At that point, I'd be like, okay, fuck this. Like, this is not how it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
Um, but just off of this fresh test, I think there's a good chance that we bounce at least a little bit, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I just feel like in general, most people's low volatility kind of scenarios are predicated on price being glued to 20K, which makes sense structurally, but part of me thinks it's just asking for a lot when it comes to that level, right? As in, you have to absorb all the urgent selling from the 3EC, etc. Luna blow up, and then all the macro selling you have to absorb there as well. Oh, and by the way, the kind of 3, 6, whatever 12-month range that we're going to have, you're going to also have to absorb it at that same price point. So you have to go from like one side of the volatility spectrum all the way to the other and be more or less glued to the same area at the very least, as far as like where the bottom is. It feels like a tall order. It's certainly possible. I'm still, treating it from, as you mentioned, like a trader's point of view. But I guess there is also just like a greedy part of me that wants to see the industry pushed and these much previous cycles, lower levels pushed, and just kind of see what's who's waiting down there. I listened to this interview Sam did with one of, I don't know, it was one of these channels, and he was saying how, in his estimation, if sort of prices go closer towards 10K, it'll be a very similar type of industry crunch to the kind of 6K to 3K move, where a lot of these businesses just didn't have any plans whatsoever to remain profitable or solvent at those types of prices. And so his argument was that like most of them are fine at 20K, but much below that they're really not fine. And that's where his comments came about like potentially backstopping or like buying, adding some delta to sort of FTX itself by buying BTC as like a providing some liquidity at those prices. For him, that's like a sub 20, sort of 17K I saw thrown around, and even like 10K is when he thinks the industry crunches. By no means does that mean the market has to go there. It just makes it a very interesting price if it does. But yeah, I agree with you. As far as like shorter term TA on these things, if you look on the monthly time frame where we just had our monthly close, the way it closed, as you mentioned, is pretty much like engulfed previous month's price action, not fully, but like more or less, and closed at 20K. One thing I'm monitoring is, as you can see, it spiked previous month's high, right? But didn't yet tap previous month's low, which could be a decent kind of intra-month target. And if you look at where that lands on the daily time frame, it ends up being like a really nice sort of range low level, sort of at 19K or thereabouts, where that double bottom is anyway, and where the bottom of the daily range is at like 18.7, 19K, whatever. I could see a world in which the market trades down towards or trades through those previous months low in the bottom of the range, and then you get some sort of failed breakdown there at around, I don't know, 18,000s, and that kind of sets the short to mid-term range, and then you can rotate towards the range midpoint to like 22K, and then maybe even the range high at sort of the higher 20s. That's kind of something that would be very actionable for me personally. Where it is right now, I agree it's like weekly support. But I'm just looking over to the lows to the left. I'd love to see a kind of poke and prod through those and see who's waiting below, if anything. But yeah, short-term TA wise, I think that sums it up quite well. It's still kind of 20K do or die. The die levels are like what, 14, 12, 10 industry meltdown basically. The upside levels, I think, given Bitcoin's relative weakness, you kind of have to play it almost on level to level basis, where your daily range is at like mid 20s, high 20s, then maybe we get our bigger retest in 30K if things really, really resolve bullishly. But honestly, Bitcoin's struggle to participate in any type of either macro strength or crypto strength has been really sucky, and it's been really evident as well. So I think in most cases, at least given the charts we're about to discuss with ETH and ETH BTC, etc., if you're going to position for crypto specific strength, it still seems to me to be the case that you want to express those views via ETH and not via BTC. Do you have anything to add there, or should we hop on to Russian big penis coin?
let's hop on that.
Let's hop on that. Yeah. Let's hop on that. Okay, great. Thank you, Don. Oh, yeah. One thing I'd quickly add on the Bitcoin Weekly. I don't know what you think of this cluster. You mentioned about having structures to work with. If you look on the weekly chart, the weekly candle from the 20th of June, 2022. So the first small green candle.
That as well.
Yeah, after the turbo nuke. That seems to me to be kind of good intro, sort of week to week resistance.
It is.
I certainly want to see a close above that, and then we can have a more decent case. Because otherwise, what you have is a double engulfing or two huge red weeks, and then just like a bearish retest into there. That's not so good. So, kind of in terms of medium-term pivots, I think that's a decent one.
I agree.
Cool.
This is like the best place. Like if you're sitting on the sideline, scared to bid support because it's been tested, and it's kind of scary in general. I think once we reclaim that area, it gets like you get much better setups.
Yeah.
The 20.8K area. Obviously still can chop around. This is a chop market, and it's going to continue to be one most likely. But yeah, it's like a safer bet, I guess.
Yep. Cool. Let's move on from BTC. Hopefully that was helpful. And as always, if you're enjoying the Casual Friday, leave us a like and a comment to get us back into the algo, given our absence. I'm sure we're being punished by the YouTube gods for it. Nonetheless, ETH USD, not much to say on the monthly close side of things, I think, right?
Yeah, it just looks good to me, honestly. Like the monthly close, you would expect something like this, right? We've had a massive green candle offer support, and then you get a tiny red one. Very often the case. I'm not really like that. I saw a few people commenting, being like, but look at the ETH monthly. I'm like, what? Like this did a 2x, right? 2x in 1 month. I'm not too worried about that. looks pretty decent to me on the monthly,
Yeah,
honestly.
that's the monthly close. I think if you look to the candle bodies of previous cycles level, I think this is similar to what we had in Technical Roundup, which is like 1.1 to 900 ish.
Yeah,
If you look at the monthly close before the one we just had, it kind of closed through the top side of the level and then closed above it the next month, right? That was the big
yeah.
engulfing 100% month. What I often observe on intraday timeframes is the market likes to come back and retest those levels where you get like candle close below, candle close above, and then you sometimes get a pullback and a wick into that support, and then you get like a really nice move. So I think in terms of like, again, mid-term trading, if there's a pullback to the 1k ish handle, I mean, yes, the chart would look terrible, but in terms of at least short to mid-term bounces, on a kind of monthly basis, that's something I'd be interested in personally.
Hmm.
Not to move away from the monthly chart too quickly, one of the targets that you had for this rotation was over 2k, because that's
Yeah.
sort of where the candle bodies on the monthly time frame really start to emerge. I think the earliest one is like 2200. Depending on which close you use, you get into like 2600 ish or thereabouts. A lot of those weren't hit. Do you think they will be? Are you like betting on ETH continuation towards 2k plus?
Looks kind of likely to me. Yeah, I
Okay.
think in general, like it's more likely to go to 2.5 ish from here than it is to go to 1.1k.
Mm,
But yeah, that might just be me and my positions talking because I still have all my ETH. Like, it's one of the things that I didn't sell. And but yeah, it looks really good to me still, even on the monthly. And oftentimes with these kind of situations, right? Like if my target is 2 point something on the monthly, that just means that I think there's a good chance that we like close in that area, but we could wick higher. So yeah, I think there's still like room to go for ETH. The narrative still hasn't fully played out. Um, so yeah, I'm like kind of betting on ETH, not really too certain about Bitcoin and the rest, but ETH, I still have quite a bit of conviction in.
but that's not just a relative trade to BTC, right? You're holding ETH like you're long ETH itself, like outright, like
Yeah,
against
yeah, I
USD.
have again, yeah, I have ETH against USD. So I
Cool.
bought ETH with euros actually because like I put a bunch of euros back in the market, which is kind of nice because the euro just completely vanished. So I
Yeah.
made like a couple of percent on that, just off of that because I
Indirect forex trading.
yeah, I mean it's like 10% or something or 15, I think.
Ridiculous.
It's completely stupid. Um, but yeah, I still have that. And I think I'm gonna continue holding that. Like, I mean, my average is 1,000 on ETH,
Nice.
or thereabouts. So like, I'm still quite comfy.
That's good to hear. As far as weekly, this is the chart I want to discuss with you, the weekly time frame on ETH. So the
Mm,
market pico topped at our long-standing cluster. We had this like in technical roundup before the break. You know that
yeah.
highest close candle at like 2k or whatever, like eight
Hmm.
1900. That was like a perfect retest of that structure, and it like engulfed and pulled back quite a fair bit. Now in terms of where the USD pair pulled back to, I mean you could if you wanted to add a level at around 1400s, so sort of the
Hmm.
big weekly down candle from 21st of February, 22nd of February 2021, which
Hmm.
lands at around 1420 or thereabouts, pretty much where the low of the week is. I'm not a huge fan of that level. Like, I don't love it completely, to be honest with you. Even if you take the cluster before that at like 1390s or thereabouts, sort of the weekly candle, like the red weekly a few weeks before that. Like I'm not in love with any of these structures. To me, the really good level was, I mean, obviously the 1k round number, etc. But then the really good resistance was at 1900. I'm not sure whether I'm fond of many kind of intra sort of weekly time frame levels between them, right? So to me, this leg up structurally looks quite retraceable. And if you look on the daily time frame, like I don't know, Don, the way I kind of been dicing it up on weekly open, for example, was that there's a really good range on the daily between like 1700 and 1900. There's a really good range on the daily between like that 1200 to 900 consolidation basically. But this
Hmm.
1500 ish area, while I could add some support levels on it, it seems a lot more choppy and less clear to me. Like I've got a really clear range above, really clear range below, and then this midpoint for me is just kind of not as good. And if anything, it looks kind of resistancy depending on how you draw your levels. Like if you take the highest on the daily, the highest close of the 18th of July 2022, that gives you kind of 1580s, 1600 or thereabouts, and that area looks quite busy, right? So I'm just wondering what you think in terms of, the market's pulled back obviously from weekly resistance. Do you have any good levels in terms of where it's ended up now that's given you conviction that this is the higher low spot as opposed to having to reach lower towards, 1.1, 1.2K and thereabouts? Like, what have you
Uh,
got here in the mid 1000s that's decent?
I think in general, just the prior all-time high close, which is 1.35. We didn't quite hit it, but that's like the support level that I'm looking at, which kind of coincides also with the 25th of January kind of level, like that cluster,
Mm.
which we did kind of almost hit. So yeah, that's kind of my area to look at. And just generally, just looking at the chart, you have like a leg up, you have a little bit of a pullback um, in comparison to Bitcoin, which looks absolutely atrocious. And like you just kind of compare the two. This just looks like a normal orderly pullback from like a resistance level that you would expect the pullback to come from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like that's why I'm not too worried. And I think the reason why I'm not expecting 1.1K is because I kind of have like support between 1.2 and 1.3, like a lot of support. So I don't think we're gonna reach any lower than that.
Mm-hmm.
Which just kind of makes me think either we kind of like drift lower again from here into 1.3, 1.2, or we just straight up go up. I don't really see, like, I don't think it's very, very likely we just break those in the first try. If
That's
anything, I
fair.
think we would test them, bounce, and then I'll have to make a new decision. Like, let's say we go to 1.2K and bounce, like the mid 1.2Ks. I would have to kind of look at the market and see if it's actually strong or if it's just like a complacency bounce that I can sell into. That could change my opinion on things, even more so given that the merge date obviously is approaching,
Yes.
which gives the narrative a little bit less of a runway, and I want to sell before it happens. Even though I honestly think there could be a world in which it's not necessarily a sell the news event, but that's not really what I care about because my trade was just basically I'm going to buy it because I don't think people own it enough for the narrative. And now the narrative is kind of playing out a little bit. I mean, price went from 900 to 2000. That's a pretty good trade there. I obviously didn't get 900, but still, it pretty much doubled. So I don't want to get too greedy with it going into the merge. So for me, it's just like people didn't own enough. At 2K, probably they did. And I think people are now freaking out again after like a normal pullback.
Oh no, I fell for it.
Exactly, yeah. Which I mean, honestly, is fair given how the market looks. Is fair how correlated we have been to the traditional markets. It's not like I'm like the like drumming the bull drums necessarily. Um, I like you kind of hinted to at this beginning of the show. I sold a little bit, not ETH, but Solana. Um, so like I'm much lighter than I was, but yeah, I'm still positive for now.
Yeah, there are two things I think ETH related that are worth discussing. One is how long do you think, like, yeah, how long can this ETH rally last for?
Hmm.
Unless Bitcoin, while Bitcoin continues to look like shit. Because historically, I mean, I know that, this time is different, obviously, right? Because it's different every time. But like historically, these rallies where Bitcoin doesn't participate, they don't stick around, and then they tend to revert way harder than they would otherwise, right? Because the
Yes.
entire market is just concentrated into one single trade, and then they start front running each other on profit taking. The whole thing unwinds. It's a lot of fat guys trying to get through a narrow door at the same time, type of thing, and it just looks really ugly, which is what history and precedent would suggest. And the second element of that, so the first element being Bitcoin weakness, the second element is how, yeah, basically that is the merge a sell the news event? How kind of overweight is the market relative to what the catalyst actually is? What kind of flows do we expect going into it? Are we too close to it in terms of the calendar date for this trade to still have like another leg? And even if there is another leg, is it going to be the type that makes a higher high, or is it just like maybe the final leg of the merge is a lower high into like 1800, 1900, and then ultimately it kind of fizzles out type of thing, or even like a 2K failed breakout, whatever. So a question of like juice. I don't know what your views are. My views on the first one is I will still be very hard pressed to be convinced of a long-term macro bottom if Bitcoin always just continues to look this weak. Like it can underperform, it can look bad, etc. But like this amount of relative weakness for me is just rather telling, and I'm not comfortable yeeting huge amounts into like cyclical positions. If I think that like Bitcoin's still getting sold down at every single opportunity and the market is completely focused elsewhere and it's like the weakest pair out of them all, that doesn't make me comfortable. On the second question, as far as the merge timing, etc., goes, I think my rebuttable presumption is that it's still a sell the news event until proven otherwise, and I think that would reflect Bitcoin being at kind of such a teetering edge, macro still being bad slash uncertain, and just I guess the old wisdom that I wouldn't make an exception. Like if I'm going to make an exception to sell the rule, it might be in like really bullish conditions, or if I think that the inflows are really strong and they'll just soak up all the profit taking on that type of trade and it'll keep going. Kind of like how early bull cycle, we had like bullish unlocks, that whole meme, right? And the whole
Yeah.
premise there was you had so many inflows into the space that the event itself is bearish, but there's like a stronger hand willing to take the other side of it. I'm not sure that stronger hand is there, or to what extent it could keep just pushing this thing up independent of anything else. So I guess I'm not as optimistic, but I'd certainly like to see it, given it would give us some pretty good levels and some pretty good trades. I've been short-term trading ETH USD, but I guess just zooming out bigger picture, this amount of Bitcoin weakness and like a specific news-driven catalyst, which has concentrated the entire market. Like again, perp volumes on ETH, and I know there's some hedging for the proof of work forks, etc. But still, like perp volume on ETH was double that of Bitcoin on one of the 24-hour days that I checked on FTX, for example. The options volume recently flipped that of Bitcoin. Like that, there's a lot of concentration in this trade, and it doesn't make me super comfortable, at least at this juncture, after it's gone up, 100% and pulled back and done all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I do agree with it. I mean, the kind of ETH argument I've made so many times that it'd be hard to disagree with it, because we've seen that over and over and over again. My kind of thinking and how I could see this play out is that ETH does really well into the merge and Bitcoin just kind of sticks around, and then you sell and everything sells. That would make sense to me. It's just kind of like okay, the market sticks around for ETH to do its thing, and then once it has done its thing, it just disappears. I don't necessarily know. It's really, really tough to call,
That would be a
especially
hard
at,
rug, though, right? Like your scenario
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Like if the
yeah,
entire market is premised on letting ETH do its thing, and as soon as it's done, like everything goes basically. Like, oh well, that's it. Hope you had fun. The exit pump, so to speak. That would be
yeah.
that would be a proper ugly type of trade, right? Or at
That's
least
yeah,
unwinding.
that's the bearish kind of argument,
Right.
the really bearish one, because I think that's like the worst look that we could have. Um, the bullish one is that we're at 20K, which is the previous cycle. Makes sense to just be bullish there in general. And then maybe it takes a while. We just float around, people sell, lose their conviction, and then we just go up. Just the bullish side of things. I mean, ETH basically started going up before Bitcoin did on the last bottom, right? If you remember, ETH actually outperformed the entire way up from basically I mean, it started outperforming from the 2nd September of 2019
Thank
and
you, Three
never,
Arrows.
yeah, and it never really went back, right? So like it's been funnily enough, ETH's been outperforming for like almost 3 years now, which I mean is something else, right? That has to make you wonder where the strength is coming from, because that's very, very atypical for the space. Usually you have like a cycle of something and then it just completely disappears and
Yes.
then it comes back strong. ETH has just been consistently outperforming, and it's not necessarily been a move where it's like, okay, it goes up 10,000% and then it goes sideways. It's been okay, constant kind of walk up against Bitcoin. And if you look at ETH BTC, right,
Yeah,
it's
get up.
absolutely insane to look at this chart, because this looks like it's going to make new all-time highs. This looks like it's going to break the 2017 highs. Obviously, back then there was much less ETH in circulation, right? So that's a big, big move. And I don't really know what to make of it. I'm like a Bitcoin bull at heart, but just looking at this chart, it makes a lot of sense for me to be bullish ETH. And looking at ETH BTC, I think it could easily go back to at least like the 2018 kind of complacency bounce levels. And that would be another 50% from here against Bitcoin, which would be a pretty nice move. So for me, ETH is it's really odd, and it's really like it's been really strong, while Bitcoin has been really weak. So it's harder to make the argument. Okay, ETH been carrying the market on its shoulders, and that's bad because that's been kind of happening since 2019 now. Um, Obviously, when it gets extreme and Bitcoin just like sits on its support level and ETH just kind of goes, that has led to breakdowns. But this time we have like a, and like you said, this time it's different.
This time
But
it's
this,
different.
but this time we have like we have a narrative for it, right? We have a narrative for it, and we have ETH dangerously close to a range breakout that has been kind of going. Like we've had a range in ETH BTC since mid 21,
Yeah.
and we broke the range to the downside, had a tiny fake out. That had a lot of people like, okay, finally ETH is gonna pull back, and then it completely engulfed all of that and went back in the range and is now coming close to the top of the range. Which I mean, to me, if you want to be bearish this thing, you want a range breakout to the upside, it to go like a little bit sideways, then come back in the range. That's the exact opposite setup that we had at the range low. Unless that happens, it's really hard to be bearish ETH BTC. And until that changes, I'm gonna keep my ETH, I think. Unless obviously Bitcoin just disappears to 10K or something on the way there, I'd probably be like, okay, maybe I'll have to dodge the capitulation on ETH because Bitcoin will take everything with it. But for me, it kind of looks like the exact setup that I was talking about earlier is going to play out, which is basically Bitcoin is giving ETH the room that it needs, just barely. It's just barely hanging on, and then ETH does whatever it wants to do. And then there's a good chance, I think, that everything rock pulls.
Good to know. Yeah, I think the monthly chart is really good for ETH BTC. It's got that range you talked about, and then that 2018 complacency high is actually a function of that 2017 highest close. So you've got like a
Yeah.
really nice range at like 0.1, and that's a round number as well. There's like a lot of stuff lining up. I think the useful distinction that you touched on is ETH outperformance while Bitcoin is bid, which is generally fine slash good, and then ETH
Yes.
outperformance when Bitcoin is a piece of shit, which is far less, which tends to be sort of more short-lived. So that's an interesting distinction to make. Um, yeah, I mean it's tough, right? Like it's tough. I mean, there are reasons for thinking there's more room for this, and this time is different. And as long as Bitcoin doesn't expand to the downside, ETH can play ball, right? That's sort
Yeah.
of the base case that's being made. But it's just not comfortable to have that in your periphery vision, right? It's like, oh, you want to be long ETH, the narrative is there, the charts are strong, so on and so forth. But you know that like if legacy pukes a little bit and Bitcoin gets slammed, it can ruin even the best ETH setups and the most technical things, right? So that's kind of, I
Yeah.
think you have to keep tabs on both, to be honest. But yeah, really strong ETH BTC. We got some good levels from ETH USD as well. I think we should jump to legacy before jumping into altcoins, to be honest, because I care much more about legacy than I do about altcoins, which is the theme of every crypto trader, it feels like, in the last 6 months. If we
Yes.
look at the S&P, this thing has just been incredible in terms of TA trading, right? Like, let's be
Yes.
real. It's been first of all, our long-term monthly target finally got hit. That was a move from monthly support, which we covered like here and on the newsletter, into monthly resistance, which is the lowest close at like 4,300, and it kind of spiked and pulled back from that point. So in terms of monthly levels, the move was kind of complete, for lack of a better term. And then the weekly chart is really the interesting one in terms of where the market is right now, because it perfectly tagged that 3,900-ish area that also we've discussed on stream. You remember when we discussed all those awkward like candle closes right at resistance, that whole thing, and it seems to have pulled back there kind of on a wick basis almost perfectly, at least on this chart,
Yeah.
and is like bouncing a little bit now. I know you've got the entire cluster from sort of February to March of 2021 boxed out, but it's very much that same region of like sub 4K 3,900 as support, and that seems to be acting as support, right? And
Yeah.
then on the resistance side, I think I'm probably a bit more conservative than you. For me, it's actually the highest close of that previous consolidation on the weekly time frame, the 23rd of May 2022, at like 41.70, because we closed above that and then closed below and kind of basically overshot to the upside and then traded back within the range. So for
Hmm.
me, my short-term S&P 500 range is failed breakout range high at 4170s and then current support at like 3900s, and that seems to
Hmm.
be the consolidation that we're trading within, especially within the context we've already hit monthly support. But we do end up in a scenario now where equities or indices at least are at weekly support. You've got BTC closing like at 20k slash high time frame support, and ETH, well, kind of just hanging on, I guess, with a really strong ETH BTC. Despite I'm not personally like a super huge fan of the USD levels, but structurally it's fine, it's okay. Um, are we kind of all the way back to one of the last casual Fridays we did, where it's like, hey, Don, look, everything was kind of shitty, but indices are at monthly support or high time frame support, and then so is crypto, so maybe it bounces again. Is that like a fair summary of your views?
Yep. Yeah, I think in general, like, I mean, I came back, I looked at Bitcoin, I was like, holy shit, this is beyond like terrible. And I looked at the S&P. I was like, oh, I mean, the S&P is at support, and I mean, Bitcoin's at support, even though it's tested that support before. But it doesn't really make much sense to be bearish here, I think, just based on that, right? You just trade. The S&P has, for some weird reason, especially like if you look at the monthly, just been perfectly trading DTA that I do and that you do as well. And I mean, we've had like the same levels basically, 4.3 and that support. And it's been kind of tracking that perfectly, right? So using that as a guide for Bitcoin and for crypto as a whole has been really, really good. Um, so when it hit monthly support, I turned bullish, and I mean we got like a two x out of ETH basically for it. And now that it's back at, like, it got rejected at monthly resistance as well. And now that it's back at weekly support, I mean, it's less obvious than the monthly one, because the monthly one was one, not tested, and two, it's just a much higher time frame. But it's still support, right? It doesn't really make much sense to kind of be bearish at support, I think. So for me, we're back at support, same story. Bitcoin looks shit, but the S&P is at support. So if the S&P bounces, Bitcoin might go to like whatever, might bounce a little bit, and then I think ETH is going to bounce much, much more. And that's gonna be the trade basically, which is really stupid. I don't like it, obviously. I mean, I don't think anyone in crypto should like it. The only kind of saving grace for all of this is that, I mean, I used to make fun a lot about doing TA on the S&P, and it's been, honestly, I think it's not really been too good over the years. It's been decent on the high time frames, but on the lower ones, not really. But ever since the COVID crash, basically, TA has been working wonders on that thing.
Return to
So
tradition.
yeah, yeah. I think people are just like, what the fuck do we do? Like, how do we trade this thing? Nothing makes sense anymore. I think that's basically ever
Yes.
since the COVID crash. That's how it is. And then people turn back to trust the old TA because might as well believe in that when you cannot believe in anything else, right?
Yeah.
And I think out of that reason, we kind of have that saving grace that TA works pretty well. So you can kind of just trade Bitcoin by using the S&P. You could also just trade the S&P TA wise. Feels a little bit wrong to me because I mean,
It's like I'm not
I'm
smart enough to do this.
exactly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
shouldn't be, but it's been working really well. And the thing is, it's been working really well trading crypto off of it, as long as you've not been trading Bitcoin, because Bitcoin you've kind of gotten the shit end of the stick every time, because Bitcoin bounces like 5% and the S&P bounces like more, and then the S&P goes down like 3% and Bitcoin goes down like 10. So like it's been, if you're on the long side on the Bitcoin trade because of the S&P, you've kind of been getting shafted. But if you've been taking the same thing on ETH, you've actually been doing really well, right? So it depends on kind of what instrument you've been trading. But yeah, it's kind of, it does suck. I think I really hate it. I hope it stops, and I don't really see a good reason for it to continue either. Honestly, I think there's gonna be at just one day there's going to be like this weird move that goes completely against the S&P, be it to the up or the downside, and people are going to be like, okay, what the fuck? And that's where the new paradigm comes in, where we're actually not completely tracking it anymore.
Yeah.
But until that happens, you like I've seen a lot of people try to predict that moment. Like,
It's
okay,
been
now is the
months.
time. Yeah, it's like now is the time. It has to, and they keep on losing, right? So what you could do instead is just wait for that moment to happen, and when you see like a big move on one of the pairs that isn't mirrored by the other one, just kind of start thinking, right? Okay, what does this mean? Is this like a just a random thing, or is it gonna like be a sustained move? Because let's be real, whenever these moves happen, right, people are like surprised, and then they're like, this is just fake out, whatever, and then they try to trade the opposite way. But you want to be smart about it, I think, especially when you have like these high time frame areas of interest with Bitcoin at 20K, for example, or ETH like at 1K. That's where it gets interesting, but you don't want to front run that decoupling of sorts, because everyone that has been doing it is just kind of poor now.
We've
Because
been ragging on that trade for so long. Like we've written that newsletter so many times of like, oh, why this isn't a decoupling, or what you should
yeah,
expect from a decoupling, and it's still very much the case. I agree with you though. That first leg of that decoupling trade is what really carries traders out. Like that'll completely nuke you, because you'll see, for example, that like S&P up 10%, Bitcoin's down 10%. And if you like basically choose the wrong leg of that for a mean reversion, like you try to like buy BTC, for example, like this is the bearish case, right? Like S&P rallies 5% and Bitcoin drops 10. You might think
yeah,
like, oh, well, this is a mispricing. So, I'm going to like arb the difference basically and buy BTC because it's going to catch up. And then it goes down another 10%. And then that's when you get your the decoupling that no one asked for in that case. Those types of legs where you kind of fade the first leg of what ends up being a decoupling is what gets you completely fucking wrecked. And I remember that because I blew up a Deribit Gamble Stack Challenge sub account when ES was like limit down every single. Do you remember those days? Like basically
oh yeah.
COVID crash, whatever. I was that guy. I faded that leg when BTC was strong, despite ES being limit down, and I just ate shit, which is a good lesson because thankfully it was just a challenge account thing, whatever. I think I went from like 0.03 to like close to 3 BTC or something, and then just lost it all, which was fun. um,
Yeah.
but it's fine at those prices. 3 BTC is like no big deal, right? That's my cope anyway. But yeah, I just remember the structure of that trade playing out, and it's worth bearing in mind. I think if you look at the monthly time frame of the S&P, I'm just so greedy. The levels I've got is that entire basically 2018 to 2020 consolidation. The lower boundary is like 2.5, the mid boundary is like 2.9, and the upper boundary before the breakout is like 3.2, like that
Hmm.
range. And if you look on the 3 month time frame, actually, that's where it comes from. It just comes from the highest close candle in October
Slow
19.
down, Donald.
I know. Seriously, it comes from the quarterly chart. Like this range that I've got is, the highest close of 2019 October, the lowest close of January 2020, and then the midpoint between those, which is a nice breakout level at 2900. Like I'm just so greedy. Like in my mind, I'm like, oh, it'd be so nice to like trade those levels and get some sort of bottom there, and that's really good
Hmm.
structure there. And if there's some sort of like recession or winter fuel crisis or just more terrible macro, that those levels would be such a privilege to trade, as opposed to this like messy hit the lower high and then you're back to weekly support. And even the monthly support, as you mentioned, the one that we bounced from, is kind of just like it's good. It was good because it's fresh, right? Like a single candle bounce into like with a lot of panic surrounding it. But overall, that's not like the best structural area, right? So there's a
Yeah.
world in which maybe we get a bounce from this weekly, but for a macro stuff, I would really relish the opportunity to do business at those much higher time frame levels. But the market doesn't owe you shit, so I'll have to
Yeah.
just trade what's in front of me. Speaking of which, if you look at the Nasdaq as well. The good old NQs, that monthly cluster is still putting in work. Have you noticed? That's sort of I've got the US 100 up right now. That's
Oh
like a
yeah.
much clearer level of support. And look how perfectly that's been trading, right? So
Oh, that's pretty good.
it bottom ticked on the bottom of the cluster, right?
Hmm.
Then completely broke through it a couple months ago on that big green engulfing. Then it pulled back from admittedly a bit of a shitty level, not so compelling, and now it found support like kind of pico wick at that 12 12.1k level again. So both indices are putting in serious work when it comes to TA.
Yeah.
So that I think you can, as you mentioned, pretty much there's a world in which you get your high time frame directional bias from S&P 500 and Nasdaq weekly levels, and then you trade ETH basically to
Yep.
express those views. I know it sounds so stupid, and it is, but unfortunately, it just makes sense. I think approaching the market with that type of paradigm. And yes, if it like decouples or something really crazy happens, you might get fucked. But for the time being, it seems out of all the bad strategies available, that's not. It's hardly the worst one.
Yeah, I think in general, like the decoupling, right? I think the downside decoupling we've already had. That was basically when free AC blew up, and we had like the S&P be somewhat okay, and the Bitcoin just going down, down only, and everything else in the market as well. So I think if you're betting on the decoupling, you would want to bet on it to the upside at this point, which makes that trade more comfy, right? If you long because the S&P is at support, right, and it's gonna bounce, then you have the upside of, okay, the S&P goes up, people are more willing to kind of bet on the risk asset that is ETH, and then two, you obviously have the chance that it decouples, which is very very low, but it's there, and I think the decoupling is much more likely to the upside than to the downside, unless you get like Sailor Force liquidated by by tax authorities, which obviously is just me joking because I mean there is like him getting sued for tax evasion or whatever, but obviously not gonna have to sell his Bitcoin for
He
it.
does like to get creative with his reporting, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean,
Allegedly in Minecraft.
allegedly, yeah, as allegedly every single one of these like super rich people kind of are. It's just very normal. It seems like a publicity move more than anything to me. And I really don't like Sailor, so me saying that is goes against what I want to be saying because I really don't like the guy. But yeah, it seems like publicity move more than anything. I don't think that changes anything on the Bitcoin
No, I
front.
don't think so. I'd be surprised. Although
Yeah,
MicroStrategy obviously was weak into the news and has been a bit sloppy as a follow up, but that's
yeah.
not too surprising. I think one thing to consider with the decoupling, to tag on to your point, is the likelihood of an upside decoupling uh, is higher at lower prices. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
when
yeah,
we're,
that
when we're a
definitely.
super macro asset at like 60 or whatever else, like the chance of a decoupling, especially once the credit cycle turns, it's really asking for a lot, right? Because you've got like global flows being completely turned on a dime, and you can't expect crypto, especially at those like bloated, inflated market caps, to somehow keep up and keep relative strength, etc. I think the good example, as we discussed many times, the sort of inverse nature of macro right now, where after the COVID crash, it was the most accommodative policy we've like ever seen, and trying to
Yeah.
fade that was very difficult, risky, and if not impossible, right? And there are a lot of
Hmm.
bodies along the way. And I think it's a similar time now, still, where you've kind of got the inverse of that, where households are fucked, credit is screwed, crypto credit is especially screwed, just in general, like inflation, tightening, etc. We're sort of in the opposite paradigm of the COVID melt up, which is why, to a large extent, global markets have been melting down as well. But I think once you get to certain, like sufficiently low market caps, it takes so much less money to push this thing around that the odds of a decoupling increase simply because you're not as tied for those reasons. Like it gets to a point where even crypto native wealth, so to speak, if there's any fucking left, can push price around significantly and kind of force the correlation lower because it just takes exponentially fewer leverage dollars to do so. Don't know if that makes any sense, but it makes
It
sense in my
does.
head.
I
So
mean,
that's something to look out for.
the thing is, right, that just looking at stablecoin market caps, right, like there's a lot of kind of money sitting on the sidelines, so to speak. Obviously, it's not all that's going to flow back into it, but you only have to convince a few people to make a big difference at low prices, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because
Like
there's
the
a lot
impact
of,
of those dollars is higher at lower prices, right?
yeah. I mean, just looking at the market cap of stablecoins, you add them up, right, and you almost get to the ETH market cap, and it's like, what the fuck? That's kind of insane, right?
They're all coming to buy my bags, though.
Oh, yeah, please, just half of that would probably be
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I think one thing that people kind of underestimate. There's a lot of sideline capital. Obviously, people want to be sidelined right now. It makes a lot of sense to be sidelined. Um, and if the prices go any lower than this, like you said, like if we go to 10, 11, 12K, I think there's enough money to kind of buy that all up.
Oh
Now
my
the
god,
question,
yeah. At those prices, you have to like start ignoring the indices almost. I know that
yeah,
sounds a bit like
I did,
exaggerated, but at that point, you just fucking you have to get in there. You know, it's
yeah.
like the market caps are so decimated, and so many people have been carried out, and the industry is on such like a cliff's edge that if you've still got your fucking Bloomberg terminal open with Bitcoin at like 10K, wondering what the next Fed speak is going to be, I think you're out of your mind to be doing that. You know.
Yes, I agree. I mean, at 10K, if you look at it, at 10K, ETH would probably be down like more than 50%, given that at these kind of crashes, usually altcoins underperform Bitcoin. Then you'd have Tether alone have like an equal market cap to Ethereum, right? And at that point, I think you'd just kind of be stupid not to buy. Now, obviously, doesn't really, like, who knows what's going to happen. I don't think we're going to those prices, honestly. I think if you're going to be lucky if you get to like 15 to 17K, just in general for like a buying opportunity, that will be like the macro bottom. But obviously also depends on the S&P, right? If you're in the camp of the S&P is going to COVID lows again,
Oh man, what?
which I mean, I've
Maybe the
seen a few
COVID highs.
I
Can we
would like
start there?
the COVID highs kind of seem more probable. I've changed my mind over this. I was like, I think it's gonna go it's gonna go pretty low. I don't quite think COVID lows is like reasonable, at least not in the short term. I think if we got there, it would take quite a while, and that seems just unlikely. But in general, yeah, if you think that the S&P goes significantly lower, then you can bet hard all you want. But if you don't, I don't really think. And even if you do, right, like you said, at some point the market cap is so small that it doesn't matter. Like if you see ETH at 400 again, or 300, that's such a tiny market cap that like a few people that exist in this industry could buy like most of it up already. So it doesn't really make much sense to be too bearish. Like I've seen people throw around $90 targets for ETH. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? It's just you've lost your complete, like, this is just basically, if you target that, you should get out of the market and just trade something else. And it's the same with Bitcoin. If you target like 3, 4, 5, 6,000, I think you're out of your mind and you're wasting your time, right? So there's always, you have to kind of keep perspective. It's easy to bet hard, but you kind of have to realize that 20K is a really good like cyclical level still. And if you get like a deviation below 20K, that's all it's going to be, deviation, not like, okay, we're going to trade below like 20K for the next 10 years and then maybe go back up again.
And that's a failed experiment type of vibes. If
Yes,
it's like
that's
multi-year below 20K, I think is really bad if it happens.
Yeah, so I think any stab below 20K is going to be temporary and very temporary. Like it's not going to be a year that we spend below 20K. So that's my opinion, right? That's why I feel so comfortable kind of buying, or felt so comfortable buying. I'm not buying right now. Like we talked about earlier in the show, like I sold Solana. One big thank you to you actually, because I don't know if you remember, but we were talking about it. I was like, I'm not really certain about this. And you were like, just sell however, or like sell whatever you need to sell to be comfortable on your road trip without having to look at price.
See, I'm out here saving you. You know, I'm there burying Solana holders, but at least saving your relationships. It's like a good trade-off.
Yeah, so that was kind of like when I was thinking about that was kind of the reason why I sold Solana. Was because I was like, okay, one, this position is too big. So I already had taken some profit, but I was like, this position is too big and I feel uncomfortable, and I'm going to watch the charts instead of watching my girlfriend. So that was kind of like,
you want to swap? I'll watch your girlfriend. You can watch the charts.
No, thanks.
Hey, doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah, it's always always gotta grab the opportunity, right? But no, it's I was like pretty happy now, obviously, with that, given that just 2 weeks kind of took all of that back off again. And I've not really decided if I want to rebuy yet or not on Solana. I kind of feel pretty well positioned, having my ETH still, having a little bit of Bitcoin still, and
And
I
your
only have.
wonderful NFTs, how are those doing?
Oh god, dude, don't even start. I mean, honestly, like the NFTs, like the apes have been doing well. If I bought the punks that I wanted to buy in the first place before Lumda talked me out of it, I
Oh
would be up
man,
a shitload. But like some of the other NFTs that I bought, not doing too well. Like I think I'm down like 30%, 40% on some of them against
nice.
ETH, which is basically like I'm still up in USD because I
Up in
bought them
USD, the cope.
yep.
Hey, at
Because
least they're all very liquid and you can sell
oh,
them at that exact price with no
it's
slippage, you know.
it's fucking hilarious. Some of these, if I tried to sell, this market would disappear.
I mean, you're a collector
Um,
now. Congratulations.
oh,
Go
thank you very
vibe
much,
in the Discord.
dude. I'm an art collector now. Art dealer and art collector. I think even tax code wise, I kind of am now. So
Great.
yeah, this is
Congratulations.
a weird fucking thing.
Technical
But yeah,
Roundup, art dating entertainment show. And we sometimes do markets.
dude, I think like, and this is something that you said at the beginning of the show. People always say that they're not interested in the personal life, but 100% more people are interested in the personal life than they're actually in the markets, which is
Especially
fucking,
now. I mean, good heavens, right?
yeah. Like fucking hell, the market's not been moving, so people want to hear about love stories and
Yeah.
whatever, travels, all that kind of stuff.
Or
Maybe
betrayal,
I'll talk.
jealousy, revenge.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about that on the Wednesday show, the next one.
I love it. You come back from a month of not talking about markets, and you finally do a stream and you don't talk about markets. It'd be very you thing to do.
Yeah.
I've got
No,
the Solana chart open, by the way, the Sol
oh yeah.
Weekly.
Mhm.
When you bottom ticked it, I was really mad because I thought the level you were buying was shit slash early. I mean, it obviously wasn't, but the level that
Mhm.
I've got on the weekly is actually the lowest close from that turbo nuke on the 17th
Mhm.
of May, which lands at like $24.50.
Oh yeah.
That's sort of my range low. I can see a world in which I buy that for a short-term trade because it would mean taking out that swing low where the bottom was formed, and then trading into what I think is real support, and then any sort of absorption there. You can trade it towards the range, back towards the range midpoint at 32, and maybe even the range high at 42, and that'd be a really good range bound trade. I don't know if this is the macro range bottom. I mean, you should fucking better hope it is, because otherwise it goes pretty close to like what, $10, $14, whatever, like much scarier prices.
Yeah.
But like where it is right now, I'm slightly less fond of it. It kind of just looks, pretty much looks like the range high did its job. The Donald sell program in the 40s just kind of crushed this thing. And to me, the range low is more or less untested. And I guess to a broader question, what do you think about alts in general? My view has been I find them really boring at the moment. Outside of like specific plays that crop up for maybe a couple of weeks or much lower cap sort of uniswap rotational stuff, etc., or like maybe atom pumps on the odd day, etc.
Mhm.
I've not found there to be super compelling or interesting sticky altcoin narratives. And I'd rather just and the market is pretty much so concentrated on ETH and it's like a good trade. Like it just makes sense, and the levels are good, and the volumes are high, and the TA works well. My view has been like you look at BTC, you look at ETH, you look at risk indices,
Yeah.
and that's kind of at least your bread and butter. And if you want to like express some of those views, like what we'd ordinarily say, right? Like, oh, you can buy BTC and ETH if you want to be conservative, and if you want the higher returns, you put it into some shit coins which have higher risk and higher reward as well. But even that hasn't been true for like long periods of time because ETH has performed even the lower cap altcoins, which would
Oh
ordinarily
yeah.
have a
That
higher
yeah.
percentage return. So even that kind of beta effect, where you take on the shitcoin because you get a higher yield or bigger juice from it, higher beta, it just hasn't been true, which is why I've been so sort of ETH centric. So I don't know if you've got like any altcoin narratives that are on your radar. I just think it's pretty much ETH's world, and we're living in it until proven otherwise.
That I definitely agree with. I think in general, like a lot of altcoins have actually been doing really well against Bitcoin. Like you look at Litecoin, for example. I know with Litecoin,
Here we
blah blah
go.
blah. But that's like look at that Litecoin Bitcoin chart. like a lot of these have been doing well. It's just been kind of hidden away by the Bitcoin movements.
And the fact that no one knows what Litecoin is anymore.
Yeah, that on top, obviously. But no, it's actually really interesting. This kind of feels to me like there's a few charts that look still really, really strong, right? Like Wi-Fi, Litecoin, ETH, Atom, like just like to name a few that I'm seeing. And I wonder what it is. Like it feels like a little bit of like a stealthy old season, but not really thing, where it's like you have like alts just completely outperform, but the entire market is so shit that you don't even realize it yet. Because the thing is, right, the holders that are sitting in these coins, right, they're down bad, obviously, in every kind of sense of the word, because they took a big beating on the Bitcoin drop, and then they took a big beating against Bitcoin on that drop as well, and you're kind of fine. Um, that could change, I think, going into the merge, and then you could see some rotation jumping from ETH into some other altcoins further down the risk curve or approaching the merge. And I think it could change if ETH actually breaks out here, because then people are actually going to start talking about old season again. I think that's going to be, if that happens, that's going to be the exit pump on everything.
Yeah.
And then you're going to see like a massive move to the downside, if temporary, right? Like let's say Bitcoin does well, S&P bounces from here, Bitcoin goes to like 24, 25, 26,000 again. And ETH just kind of plays fully into the merge and kind of just goes to 2.5K-ish or whatever that number is going to be, or 3K even. I don't think it's too out. Like it sounds crazy, but I don't think it's too unlikely. It's one of the biggest catalysts that we've had. Market obviously is kind of depressed, but still. And then I think you could see like a bunch of these altcoins rally, and then I think you could see that 50% move to the downside. So like Bitcoin from 26 to 13K or 14K off of like an old season exit pump thing.
That would be bad. That would make me bearish, dude. Like, I think if you get like a pump into the merge, like a big pump into the merge, and then an attempted rotation from that I think it's
Yeah,
like lights out at that point. That would make me
yeah,
really bearish. I think
that,
the
that
scope for like in current conditions, as tired as it is to say that, for me at least, the bandwidth for like a meaningful market wide rotation is really fucking low, if not there at all. I think it's much more likely that you get, at best, the market gets rewarded for its ETH concentration, and then it's just a rush for the exit, and that affects everyone and everything.
Yeah, I honestly, like for me, it's just basically I think the ETH play is in full effect. I'm not gonna hide away from it. I'm just gonna embrace it, and everything that comes after, I'm just gonna wait and see. Basically, I wouldn't want to bet on any kind of like big old season rotation thing either.
Yeah.
If it does happen, I'm gonna play the ones that I know have been showing strength. So you just look
Litecoin,
at.
let's be real.
I
You're
mean,
gonna buy Litecoin.
there could be
Litecoin,
some Litecoin in there.
ICX.
Oh God, no, I cannot do that one. But there's a few, like when you see strength during depressed times, that's the ones that you want to be rotating into when everything looks a little bit better. Um, but yeah, for me, this could either, and I'm not like as like looking at it as bleak as you are. I like even if we have like an ETH pump into the merge, I could see that just be the start of a new cycle. To be honest,
Gosh, that'd be hot.
yeah.
I'd be very surprised, but it'd be a welcome surprise.
Yeah. But then again, like who knows? I'm just gonna take it day by day. I'm not really in a rush. I mean, I'm just coming back home from a vacation, and nothing's really changed, right? People are like, "Oh, have you sold?" And it's like I left at what, like 24K, 23K, 23K Bitcoin, I think, roughly, and ETH at like 1.6, 1.7. ETH is at 1.6. Bitcoin is a little bit lower. Obviously, some of the other altcoins like Solana is obviously quite a bit lower. But still, like nothing's really changed, right?
Structurally, yeah, it's more or less. I guess the only
It's
exception would be the face melting rally in equities, and whether that was the top of a lower high or whether we set a higher low. I think that's
exactly.
quite literally, that's probably the only thing that matters materially of like how this pullback in equities resolves. I think that has like an overbearing impact on at least what I'm going to think. of the market. But in the short term, yeah, if you've got stuff stacked at support, and if you're like in day trading mode, that those are signals worth taking seriously.
Yep.
Cool. Any final bits and pieces? What can we expect from the live stream? What are you focusing on now that you're back? What's on your radar? What's the lay of the land with your return?
I mean, I'm just gonna go back to how it used to be. I'm looking forward to kind of doing everything like the weekly open, and then the newsletter and my show, or like our show, but with me, I guess. And like in general, like it's just gonna go back to the way it used to be. I cannot promise that it's gonna be as like, okay, timing wise, like that the times are always gonna be the same, like it used to be, as in like, okay, I always stream at like this and that time, because life's been a little bit more busy in the last few weeks. Um, but it's still gonna be like, you're gonna get like a Wednesday video from me. You're still gonna see me on Monday. So nothing's changed on that front. And then I mean, I think, given that the range is pretty, like the Bitcoin range is pretty boring. I mean, me personally, I'm going to focus on ETH, like we've talked about in this entire show, and just see how it goes. I think that there could be some cool action coming into the next few weeks, but in general, like my view is that it's still time to kind of take time for yourself, work on yourself, do whatever you want to do the hobbies that you've kind of not been doing, and wait for better times, basically. That's kind of like the best thing that you could be doing, I think. And I mean, that's what I'm going to do, besides doing like the occasional stream here and there and everything else. So yeah, not much different than how it was like a month or two ago.
Yeah, dude gets one girlfriend in 10 years and becomes a life coach. Good to know. Thank you.
Oh no,
That's all from us.
Oh,
Unless you want to
God.
try to come back from that, but I think you should leave it. Honestly, don't dig.
Don't fight it. I will
You'll have
not.
your Wednesday stream to talk all the shit you
Oh.
want. But for the time being, welcome back, and welcome back to the channel more broadly. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, videos. Tuesday, newsletter, trletter.com. All of it for free. Make sure to click on FTX links below to support us. Get the mobile trading app. We'll have some cool stuff coming around their other platforms in the near future. Take care, and we'll talk to you next week.